which are the best characters from each element? Many beginners who start Genshin Impact will always ask this question. So I've been playing Genshin Impact for over 3 years now, and I have experience with all of the characters, so I am quite qualified to tell you which are the best characters from their respective elements. But today we are going one step further. I'm not going to tell you about just one character. Instead, I will give you the best character for each role from their respective elements. So I'll give you a best support, sub DPS / off-field DPS, and a main DPS from each of the elements. So with that out of the way, let's start with Anemo. So Anemo has quite a few selection of characters, and some of them are not very good, but the same is not true for the best support from Anemo, which is Kaedehara Kazuha. So Kazuha is not only the best support from the Anemo element, he is one of the best support characters in the entire game. Kazuha has a lot of useful utilities. He is one of the few characters who can buff your elemental damage bonus, which is the best kind of buff you can have. So Kazuha increases all of your party members' elemental damage bonus when he swirls any element. On top of that, Kazuha can use the Viridescent Venereal artifact set, which will decrease the enemy's resistance to the element that was swirled. So Kazuha is giving your entire team a buff and applying a debuff to all the enemies at the same time, and he can do all of this with just a single elemental skill. And his elemental skill is also very good as it can group up nearby enemies. So Kazuha being the best Anemo support is not a surprise because he is one of the best character in the entire game. But the same cannot be said for the best sub DPS from Anemo because there is none. There is not a single off-field damage dealer from Anemo. So the closest thing that we can get for a sub DPS will be a quick swap DPS. So it will be a character who can easily swap in, do a bunch of damage and swap out. There are only two characters who quite fit this category, and they are Heizo and Venti. Now Heizo can also be run as a main DPS and he is quite good at C6, but C0 Heizo is not that good, but he can be a very good quick swap DPS, so he can be a good choice for that, and he's also very good in taser teams. But the best DPS character from Anemo is very clear. It is either Wanderer or Xiao. So if we are purely talking about DPS, then Xiao easily beats Wanderer because Xiao does a ton of damage with his plunges, and now that we have Shanyun to boost Xiao's plunges, he is now stronger than ever. Despite all of that, Xiao still has some issues. First is obviously his energy requirements, so you will need some good teammates for him who can provide him with energy, and the second issue is his plunging playstyle. Now some people like this plunging playstyle and some people hate it, because if you are fighting a larger enemy or specifically a boss, then plunging will be very powerful, as first of all, the enemy you are fighting will not get flunked around and you can consistently hit him without chasing him down. And also sometimes if you are fighting a very big enemy, then you can sometimes get two instances of damage, one from the initial plunge hit and another from the plunging splash attack. So you will be getting at least 40% extra damage from your plunges, which is quite nice, and Xiao already does a ton of plunging damage. Also Shenyun is also there to boost his plunges even further, so therefore Xiao is the best Anemo DPS. Alrighty, so next is Cryo. Now Cryo has a lot of bad characters in my opinion, so the best support from Cryo will be Shanha or Charlotte. Now Shanha is the only pure Cryo support character that we have, and she only buffs Cryo damage, nothing else. This makes her a very niche support character, but the buffs that she provides are very good. And as for Charlotte, now you'd be thinking, why is Charlotte here? Well, let me tell you. First off, Charlotte's healing is insane. She can heal a crap ton with her elemental burst, which is very nice if you don't run a shielder or if you are running someone like Furina who will constantly drain your HP. And secondly, Charlotte's elemental skill is also quite useful because she can mark the enemies with her elemental skill, and those enemies will take cryo damage periodically, which makes her a very good character for any freeze team. And one of my favorite team is Nuvolet freeze team with Charlotte. So in that team, Charlotte is very good, as with her skill and Nuvolet's laser, you can perma freeze the enemies given that that enemy can be frozen. If not, then still her healing is quite good. But what's not good is also Cryo's sub DPS options. Now Cryo, similar to Anemo, does not have any sub DPS or off-field DPS. The closest off-field DPS we have is Rosaria. In my opinion, Rosaria is a quite underrated character. First off, she gives a good amount of crit rate with her passive after using her skill, so that's a good thing. Secondly, her elemental burst is also quite decent. It does decent damage, but it applies cryo very quickly to all the enemies in an AoE. And if you put Rosaria with Shangling, then you can run a melt team. And Rosaria can also be used as a battery for cryo energy hungry characters like Ayaka. So I think Rosaria best fits the description of a sub DPS. And as we are talking about Ayaka, the best cryo DPS is obviously Ayaka or Riotsly. Now Ayaka and Riotsly are very subjective. On one hand, we have Ayaka who can do a crap ton of damage with her elemental burst, and on the other hand we have Riotsly who has some pretty respectable personal damage, but he is best used as a driver in reaction teams because he is a cryo catalyst unit who can apply a ton of cryo with his normal attacks, which makes him a very versatile unit. You can run Riotsly in a melt team, or you can run him in a freeze team, or you can also run him in a fridge team, which is Hyper Bloom plus Frozen, but his personal damage is not very significant unless you have his C1. Otherwise at C0, Ayaka definitely has better DPS. Her elemental burst hits like 20 times and it does a crap ton of damage, but Ayaka's major issue is her energy problems. She needs a ton of energy, so most of the time you will need another cryo character like, as I mentioned earlier, Rosaria, to battery her so that she can always have her burst up. But if you ask my opinions, that I would say the best DPS will fit Ayaka more because of her personal damage. Okay, next up is Dendro, and Dendro has very clear winners for each of their respective categories. So the best support from Dendro is obviously Nahida. So Nahida needs no introduction. She is one of the best characters in the game and her utilities are extraordinary. She can apply a lot of Dendro while being off field. She provides a lot of elemental mastery. On top of all that, she can also do some quite respectable damage with her elemental skill, and she has a lot of versatility in her team options as well as weapon options. So Nahida, being an overall very good support character, is the best support character from Dendro. And as for the best sub DPS from Dendro, it is none other than Emily. Emily just recently came out and she is an absolutely great character. She has a lot of off-field damage with her elemental skill, and not only that, she also utilizes a very unpopular reaction, that is burning, to do increased damage. And the best part of her damage, it doesn't need your active character to do anything to activate it. Her elemental skill will do damage on its own. It doesn't need any kind of attacks to trigger it, so it makes her a very good AFK character. So she will be very good when paired with Fischl, who can also do AFK damage. So Emily is definitely the best sub DPS from Dendro. And as for the best DPS from Dendro, it is also a no-brainer choice. It's Alhaitham. So Alhaitham is the best Dendro DPS by a long shot. He does a crap ton of damage with his elemental skill and normal attacks, and also his elemental burst. So every part of Alhaitham's kit is dedicated to dealing damage, and the damage is very good. His elemental skills, projection attacks can do massive amounts of damage, but incredible as he is, Alhaitham has some issues, and the main issue with Alhaitham is how his kit actually works. So to do the maximum possible damage with Alhaitham, you need to manage his chisel light mirrors, and to do that you have to perfect his rotations and you have to have some decent amount of skill to pull it off. So Alhaitham is a character that will require you to understand his kit and to practice his rotations, but once you master his rotation, he will be an absolute crazy unit who will do a lot of damage. And not only damage, he is also very versatile, as you can run him in a spread team, in bloom teams, in hyper bloom teams, or even in some virgin teams. So Alhaitham is definitely the best DPS from Dendro. Next is the element with a lot of bad characters, and it is none other than Electro. Now we are face to face again with the same issue, because there is zero good support characters from Electro, because the only pure support characters we have are Dori and Kujo Sara. Dori is absolute garbage, and Sara can be a good buffer for Electro characters, but most of her potential is locked behind her C6. So the best Electro support will go to Kuki Shinobu, and this is because Kuki is a very good character in Hyper Bloom teams where she triggers Hyper Blooms, and I don't know if you count Hyper Bloom triggerers like a DPS or not, but the fact that Kuki can heal and she can also trigger Hyper Bloom all the while being off field, I think she passes as a support. So she is the best support character. There is nothing else to say. All the other Electro supports are very bad, and on the contrary, the best Electro sub DPS is none other than Fischl, or you can also go Yai Miko, but I'll go with Fischl. Fischl does a ton of damage. Well, actually Oz does all the damage. Still, the damage is insane, and one of Fischl's passive talents makes her do extra Electro damage whenever any of your characters trigger any Electro related reaction. So this does increases Fischl's damage even further, and she is also a very good battery for any Electro characters. So all in all, Fischl is a very good character and most definitely the best sub DPS of Electro. And as for the best Electro DPS, again I have two characters, Chlorand and Raiden Shogun. Now both of them are quite the opposite. Raiden is very versatile, but she does less damage, and Chlorand does very good damage but is not versatile at all. Now Raiden can be run as a pure DPS, or you can run her as a driver, or you can also run her as a Hyper Bloom triggerer, but Raiden excels in all of those roles, and her personal damage is also very good. And on the other hand, Chlorand does a crap ton of damage provided you are making use of her passive talent and you are running her in an aggravate team, then you will see a lot of damage. But one area that she struggles is AoE. Now Chlorand can actually pierce enemies with her pistolet shots, but all the enemies need to line up in a straight line, otherwise you won't hit them. And on the other hand, Raiden also has very good AoE potential as well with her elemental burst and her Muso Ishin shots, as those attacks have a very large range. For me, Chlorand and Raiden both are equally powerful depending on the scenario, so I will put them both as the best Electro DPSs. Next element is the middle child of Genshin Impact, Geo. Now, the best support character from Geo is obviously Zhongli and his Dongli. There is no question about it. Zhongli's shield is thick and pretty much unbreakable if you build him with a lot of HP, but that's not the right way to build Zhongli, because Zhongli, aside from his thick shield, has a lot to offer. For example, he can use the tenacity of the Millilith artifact set to give your entire team attack boost whenever his Dongli hits any enemy. And also, many people forget that Zhongli's Meteor has a huge multiplier which can do a sizable chunk of damage if you just build him a little bit sub DPSy. Again, shameless plug, video right here. You can check out the best way to build Zhongli. But the fact is, Zhongli is definitely the best Geo support character. Just like there is no question about the best sub DPS from Geo, which is obviously Chiori. So Chiori is your typical sub DPS who will summon their pet, well in this case her dolls, to do Geo damage, which does some respectable damage, and Chiori can have up to 2 of these dolls active at a time if you use her skill while there's a Geo construct nearby. So pairing her with another Geo character who can create Geo construct is very good, and her elemental burst is also just straight up damage. But Chiori also has her fair share of problems. The first problem being she's a defense scaling character, which means she has very few ways to boost her personal damage. So aside from the characters who can give damage increase, the other supports can't buff Chiori. Obviously Geo is the neglected element, what do you expect? But what you can expect is a very good DPS from Geo, which is obviously the one and only Navia. Navia completely destroys all the other Geo DPSs, which we have only 2, Ito and Noel, and both of them scale with defense. And as I mentioned earlier, there is not a lot of ways to boost defense scaling characters, but Navia is attack scaling Geo character who can do casual 100k plus hits with her elemental skill. That thing is a freaking shotgun, and it also hits like a shotgun. So yeah, shotgun for the win. And definitely Navia is the best Geo DPS. Next element is probably the best element in Genshin Impact, and it is Hydro. And honestly, all of the Hydro characters are incredibly powerful, but the best support character from Hydro is quite obviously Furina. Furina is not only the best Hydro support, but she is subjectively the best support character in the entire game. Now Furina gives a ton of damage increase with her fanfares, plus Furina's minions from her elemental skill also does a crap ton of damage, although they do drain your teammates HP. But this is also a good thing, because with Furina in your team, you can run the Marashuse Hunter artifact set on every single character, and that artifact set is probably one of the best artifact set. So all in all, there is nothing more to say. You already know how broken Furina is. And as for the best sub DPS from Hydro, you can also make the argument for Furina, because her minions can do very good amounts of damage, but we are not putting same characters for two categories, and we already have a very good and probably a better sub DPS option, which is Yelan. Yelan is definitely one of the best off-field sub DPSs. She can do a ton of damage with her elemental burst, all the while being off-field, plus she also provides a damage boost to your active character while her elemental burst is active. So not only you are getting extra damage, you are getting a damage increase on top of that, which is absolutely crazy. And before Furina's release, Yelan was also the best support from Hydro, but now the crown goes to Furina, and Yelan is also the sub DPS queen, and the king of Hydro DPS is obviously Monsieur Nuvolet. This Hydro Dragon Sovereign is not only the best Hydro DPS, but arguably the best DPS. So there is nothing more to say about Nuvolet. He does a crap ton of damage, he shoots a laser out of his palm, he can spin like crazy, he can destroy everything, and he can do all of this without needing premier 5-star supports. And if you give him premier supports, then he will be absolutely cracked, and at that point you would win Genshin Impact. And I saved the best for the last, which is Pyro. Now Pyro has a lot of characters, and in the earlier days of Genshin, Pyro was the most dominant element with all the powerful characters, but now things have changed and Pyro fell off. But still, Pyro has some of the best characters in the entire game, starting with the best support from Pyro, and it is not even close by a long shot, and it is Bennett. Bennett is from day one the best support character. You can put Bennett in any team with the attack scaling DPS, and he will increase your damage significantly. Plus Bennett also heals, and what more can you ask from a 4-star who was released with the game's release? He is one of the oldest characters who are still very good in the meta despite their age, and the same thing can be said for Xiangling. She was also released with the game's release, and she was also given for free if you completed 3rd floor of Spiral Abyss, and this free character is probably better than 90% of all of the DPSs. Xiangling is truly the best sub DPS character in the entire game. Her elemental burst Pyronado does a crap ton of damage. It doesn't have any ICD, so you can proc Vaporize in every single hit, and the reverse is also true. It can apply Pyro with every single hit, so she is also good in reverse Vaporize or reverse melt teams. And at C6, Xiangling is probably better than a lot of 5-star DPSs, and that says something. But the same cannot be said for the best Pyro DPS, who is Arlecchino. Arlecchino just came out recently, and she absolutely destroyed the concept of of a good DPS. She can casually hit for 100k normal attacks, and just look at her animations. This clean animation combined with the insane amount of damage she can do, plus she has a scythe. Yeah, she is definitely the best pyro DPS, and Arlecchino and Neuvillette are arguably the best DPSs in the entire game. It depends on who has the better build, but Arlecchino is definitely the best pyro DPS. No one even comes close to her raw pyro damage. Maybe Lini can, but with a lot of setup, and he's a charge attacking bow character, which are very clunky to play. So Arlecchino is the best pyro character, and I think with that we are done. Or maybe I'm forgetting something. Oh yeah, physical. So the best physical character, I mean the only physical character is Eula. She's the best support, DPS, sub DPS. Don't use physical, don't use Eula. She is good but kind of bad at the same time. And if you don't want to be like physical and Eula, then hit the like button and subscribe while you're at it, and I'll see you in the next one.